to the Tech Titan Webinar Wednesday series with Intermedia. I just want to thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule to attend today's webinar. We are going to be covering your non-human users, or resources as we call them, as well as reviewing some new WebFax features. But before we get started, just want to do a quick check-in and make sure everybody can hear me. And I see one thumbs up already flying across the screen. So just if you can hear me, just give me a thumbs up, let me know, or a smiley face or anything. All right, fabulous. Looks wonderful. So my name is Kim Withrow. I'm the manager of the sales engineering team here at Intermedia. And, you know, Intermedia's Webinar Wednesday is a really popular series of webinars that take place every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So it's broken up into two separate tracks. There's the Business Builder track and the Tech Titan track. Now, the Business Builder track is designed to help you as a partner grow your business and ultimately your success with Intermedia. Now, the Tech Titan track, which today's webinar is a part of, is designed to give you live demos and deep technical dives into features that can bring real value to you and your customers. So today's webinar is going to be about 30 minutes long, with about 20 minutes of content and about 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please click on the blue question mark square at the top center of your screen. That'll open a little dialog box. You can enter your question in, and we'll go ahead and go through as many of those as we have time to do at the end of our presentation. Now, I want to mention that I've created a new email address called techtitan@intermedia.net. I'd like to hear from all of you on today's webinar around what topics you might find interesting, what demos would you find value in, what things are you confused about that you'd like to get some more training on. Please take advantage of this email address, send your suggestions and comments into us. We're very, very eager to get some feedback from you on how this series is going. All right, just a little housekeeping here to orient you. You guys have already used the emoji buttons there at the top. Also, we have the blue question mark square at the center of the screen for your questions. And then if at any time you need to switch back and forth between your phone and the computer audio, then you can use that third button there. All right, and let's briefly just talk about our Intermedia's NFR program. So NFR stands for Not for Resale, and it allows you as a partner to sign up for Intermedia products for yourself, for your own company, at a steep discount or even sometimes free. So at Intermedia, we really believe that the best way to understand and therefore sell a product is to actually use it yourself. So the NFR program is designed to help you use our products so you can become more familiar with them and better able to sell them. So if you do not currently have an NFR account, there's a couple of ways you can get one. You can contact your partner account manager, or you can call the telephone number on the 888 number that's on the screen right now. All right, just a little orientation about who we are. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Kim Withrow. I'm the manager of the sales engineering team at Intermedia. I've been with Intermedia for 10 years, if you can believe it, and I've had various roles throughout that time. Today's main presenter is Aaron Roberts. Aaron Roberts is one of Intermedia's sales engineers, and he's been with Intermedia for over 3 years. Prior to that, he worked for over 20 years, in the voice and networking field. And he was really critical to the development of the Elevate product, and he works with partners daily to support your selling from a technical perspective. And so with that, Aaron, I will go ahead and give you control, and you can get into the meat of the matter.
All right, and thanks for that introduction. Appreciate it. I really got to get that picture updated for you, and I promised that months ago.
Every webinar.
So, I do. I got to stop. For anyone who's attended a previous webinar, apologies for that. Today's topic is something that if you've ever sat through a presentation with one of your customers with us and have seen me do a demonstration, we talk about the resources and utilities section of the Unite phone service as our non-human users, or that's what I call them. So when we look at the resource and utility tab inside of the Unite administration, we are able to create 5 different types of resources or utilities. The first one is most explicitly close to a user, and that is going to be our resource option. This will be used for conference room phones, lobby phones, overhead paging speakers that are SIP enabled, for example, or SIP gateways. Basically, any endpoint that you don't necessarily need a user to have access to their desktop application or the mobile application, the types of things that are definitely more user specific. And again, you could think of so many scenarios like hallway phones and break room phones that have phones or maybe need phones, but don't necessarily need the full service that is the user. And as a side, the price of a resource is significantly different than that of a user. So if we were to take a retail guess at a retail price of a user, maybe list price high end $30 or $29.99, the resources start with their per minute plan at roughly, if I'm not mistaken, $5 per month. So a significant difference in price. So when quoting resources for users, or rather when quoting for your customers, consider the phones and conference room phones and lobby phones as resources. Or when you're building different objects on your system, don't use a full user account for just a simple conference room phone, for example. Fax resources are what we have to replicate an analog line to a traditional or a legacy fax machine. So for those scenarios where you have a fax machine and you want to continue to use it, the analog telephone adapter is about the size of a deck of cards, and it has an Ethernet jack on one side as well a phone jack on the other that commonly just has a cable that runs analog cord that runs to your fax machine. We're able to put your fax number onto the analog telephone adapter, and then whenever you need to send and receive a fax through that analog line in your legacy fax application, it will just be taken advantage of by using this tool. However, to complement a analog fax or to expand on it, we have a WebFax service that each one of the Unite users has a WebFax account available to them. This allows for them to send and receive faxes from their own specific fax number, but the whole entire organization could potentially, or a department could use one WebFax account that they each individually log into to see the send and receive log and to potentially send a fax or to look at the actual sent inbox. And we'll cover those a little bit here as well. Virtual extensions, the fourth item on our resource and utility list. This is a great tool that allows you to create an extension on the system that maps to some phone number. And I like to talk about this particular feature in my demonstrations commonly as an option for maybe sending to a cell phone that you transfer to regularly, or if you have, if you want to build a step dial to your conference bridge where you host conferences, you can create a virtual extension, for example, that allows you to put in your phone number to your conference bridge and then add a pause as well as additional digits that can enter in your PIN code to immediately join that bridge. There's more to it, and I'll show it in the detail in a moment. And then finally, we have standalone voicemail boxes, which is commonly used for those folks on the network that maybe need a phone number for to be represented themselves at the business, but they don't necessarily need a ringing phone. Or where you have a marketing campaign and you're going to have a specific phone number that you're publishing that you want to have a direct box for all requests relevant to that published number and marketing campaign go. Those are the types of resources and utilities that we have. Now, when we look at them individually with regard to what they are from a configuration perspective, we'll start, I think, first and simply with the WebFax aspect of it. From an administration perspective, it's pretty straightforward. We have the fax number, the name of the WebFax account, the PIN code if it needs to be reset, and then a settings tab. And in clicking the settings tab, what it will do is it will launch into the actual WebFax account that we are looking at. So in this case, the phone number, the 8498, When I launch into it, what I'm looking at now is what a user would what a user would see if they logged into the WebFax account as a user. So no longer are we looking at this strictly from an administrator's perspective, which is what we were doing in the host pilot interface. Essentially now, as a user logged in, and again, as I noted earlier, multiple users can be logged into the same account, so you could get away with having one WebFax for your whole division or company, for example. First, we'll land in the new and received faxes. So you'll see here we have 2 faxes that I sent a little bit ago, and the faxed number that was sent, and we have how many pages, as well as the actual fax in TIFF, JPEG, and PDF format. When I click on the View Fax option, it'll download this PDF, for example. And at this point, I'm able to open that actual file and see the contents of the fax to include the header that I had included, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment, and the contents of the fax, an old Starbucks card I got for attending a meeting. This, of course, can be downloaded by checking the fax or checking multiple check boxes and have them download them to a file locally. You could forward from here this fax to another location. So you could send it either to an email address where it'll forward it as an email attachment, or you could forward it to a fax number directly from here if you needed to fax it to another person without having to take it, download it, and then upload it to the fax. So we have some flexibility in our forwarding options of the fax. This is an exciting new set of features that we have now available in this WebFax. It has some recent improvements, which is one reason why we wanted to make sure we highlight it today in our Tech Titan webinar. The saved or uploaded faxes allows you to have some template faxes that you might use with regularity. So this would be a place to have those that you could have saved with fax that you had already sent. And our sent fax log is a pretty obvious sent log, sent file log, where we'll see the different faxes that we've sent and whether or not they were delivered. The send a fax part of the tool is probably the most exciting and the newest feature of the platform. First and foremost, we have the ability to choose a file that we want to send, and I'll use that same Starbucks e-gift card that I got. I can at that point put in some fax number, and if I send in, for example, to a fax number that I'm aware of, I can put that in. At this point, whatever information I put into this header is what's going to be sent in the fax as that header sheet. So we can put in a name, phone number, company, the recipient's information, potentially Intermedia webinars. I'll put that in there this time. We also have the ability to put a subject and a message inside that header. These are all pretty standard header things you'd see in a fax, as well as a footer. And a neat feature is we can also or fax it to an email. So it doesn't, if we don't need to fax it to a fax recipient, we can fax it to an email as well if that was a method that we needed to have it faxed to them. In any case, both options are an or available. The email address then would be here. Reply to email address would be maybe useful. And we can put in an attachment or a link in it for the delivery method that we choose to have that email sent. We also have the ability to add a subject and message to that notification email. And we have the ability to save a copy of this, and ultimately we'll be able to have it then be a template of a saved uploaded that I mentioned earlier. So if we wanted to send essentially to the same recipient at a regular basis, it would then be in the saved uploaded by saving a copy and naming it whichever specific template we would prefer. So now when I send, not only will I have that fax sent, as it's stating here, it's uploaded and it will undergo conversion to a fax image format. It then will show in the sent fax log when it's done. So currently in the sent fax log, we're pending delivery from 8:15. This looks like we got one delivered and my email was delivered. So if I were to open up my email, I would be able to open this particular fax we just had sent and be able to retrieve that image. Exciting features. We were a little bit different before this recent upgrade to where our send fax was only something that could be done from a print driver on a Windows-based machine, and that's been improved, obviously, through this portal now. As a quick image to show you what it looks like when you do get that fax via the email notification, here it is, the one we just sent. It just comes in as a simple fax and an attachment to that fax in the PDF format. So it's an easy easy concept to understand, a very straightforward and simple email, no hoopla in here besides the raw data, what you need. And if you had chose to not get the, if you had chose the link, it would have had a link to the fax instead of the PDF, to where you would have had to have put in the PIN and ultimately looked at the inbox for that fax. We have the ability to set up notifications where all faxes destined for this can be sent in an email as an attached PDF potentially, or a link like I had just mentioned. That can be the only method of notification that you use if you choose, and not come into this inbox. You're not forced to use this inbox as your central point. You can have your faxes that you receive sent via PDF. That's a pretty standard function, and one that hasn't changed since initial product. That's the WebFax, and probably the most meaty of the conversation specific to these resource and utilities, I'd say. The utilities themselves, or the resources themselves, are similar in their user configuration because they're, again, simply just some non-human type of user. So when we look at a resources configuration, much like a user, if you're familiar with it, you'll have a general tab where you're able to manipulate the caller ID and the extension, or not the caller ID, but the phone number, as well as additional phone numbers for that, in this case, conference room phone. We have the ability to manipulate the caller ID for that phone. This is, again, same sort of stuff you'd see inside of a user's configuration. Find me, follow me for call forwarding of that particular phone number or extension. It has its own voicemail, much like a user, and you can have multiple endpoints associated to a resource. So in the special case of a paging speakers, you can have 5 paging speakers, up to 5 paging speakers off of a single resource. And that's real nice because then you have one $4.99 per month charge to then page out of these 5 speakers. Just taking advantage of that as a limitation improvement. The other probably more interesting configuration inside here to talk about would be the virtual extensions. So here I'll have, I'll just use this one called Sean Test for our example. When I go into an existing virtual extension, I'll have 3 tabs. The general tab is going to be where we manipulate what the extension's name is, as well its extension, and the ability to assign it a phone number, which might seem like a rare use case, but allows you for some tricky configurations in different call routing scenarios that might come up. In any case, when this extension, or in fact this phone number that's assigned to this virtual extension, are dialed or transferred to, we're going to tell it in this virtual extension to go to some number. In this case, we're having it go to a phone number, but it could be an extension. And that phone number can be any phone number. And we have a 2-stage dialing option that I sort of mentioned earlier about putting in the PIN code for your conference bridge maybe, and then pound after that. And that gives you an option to easily enter into your conference bridge, like I mentioned earlier, by just dialing that extension that we had put into the general tab. It would dial this number, or whatever designated number, wait 2 seconds, and then put in the conference bridge digit, press pound. We also have some other flexibility. If someone were to call this while it's going through these digits, we can have music on hold when someone's transferred to that extension while it's trying to dial this number for them. That might be applicable in some scenarios. And timeouts might be applicable in the scenario where we would want to have it come back to a different voicemail box, or to the user's voicemail box, instead of maybe, if it's their cell phone, for example, going to their cell phone voicemail. The outbound caller ID, this is what's going to be presented to the endpoint that is receiving the virtual extensions calls, Route 2 calls. So we could send the call from the actual call that's being sent from that virtual extension. We could send the virtual extensions caller ID, so this way the user would be able to know that this call was actually destined for their virtual extension, not necessarily calling their cell phone, for example, if it's routed to their cell phone. We could put in any phone number we want or some number on the system. Both are options, and we can block it, which might be an indicator. That's actually probably more of a shadow from our traditional outbound caller ID settings and less applicable in this one. But in any case, all of these are options for what comes to whatever number we put into this Route 2 section. So a neat feature of the system is that virtual extension, not often used, but you can see there's lots of value to where it might be used, and they complement things like speed dials as well, in the sense that you might be able to have a vendor that you call with regularity built into a virtual extension, so then you could quickly transfer to or call that extension for that vendor. Just so many different options. And knowing what resources and utilities you have available and knowing their features is what we hoped would be a value for this particular Tech Titan, to make sure that you're right sizing your user counts and your resource counts and your fax machines. You understand that they're how to use them and where they're used, and WebFax's boundaries and what it can do for you. So naturally, this is one topic that we thought would be of value. On that point, Kim, I think that's probably where I'll be able to pause right around our thought process at 20 minutes and fire up some questions. I saw some flying in as I was talking.
Yep. Excellent. Yep. Nice job. Thank you. Okay.
You bet.
Let's go ahead and start reviewing the questions here. So we do have several that are in. And again, if anybody would like to submit a question, please click on that blue question mark square on the top center of your screen and go ahead and submit it. All right, so our first one is, it says, for the fax resource, does the customer need to maintain an analog line? And if so, does that number still get ported to Intermedia? That's from Herb.
Great question, Herb. The for a fax resource would ideally replace a analog line. That would be the intent for that. And as a side note, with regard to analog telephone adapters and analog line replacement, this is specifically in regard to a fax resource, as you noted in your question, and as we've been talking about. An analog telephone adapter can turn a VoIP signal or SIP signal into an analog line. Clearly, that's what we're doing here. However, our configuration, at least with regard to a fax resource, is explicitly and exclusively for use with the fax. If you do need to have a analog line other than a fax resource, so maybe to just an analog phone that you bought at the Fred Meyer or Walmart, then you could use the same analog telephone adapter, but you would not set it up as a fax resource, because then it would be, again, used as a fax resource only. With a more generic administration where you can adopt the device onto the system using our device adoption built into the platform, worthy of another conversation or a Tech Titan, that would also then allow for that ATA to be brought onto the system and used in any analog manner, not just as a fax resource. So that's a long answer to your first part of your question. And so the second part is, would the number then need to be ported if you were to turn off that analog line? Yes, then the answer would be we'd want to port that number over to have it then assigned to the fax resource. Great question.
Yeah, really good. Thank you for that, Aaron. Okay, great. So this one's from Troy. Has any consideration been given to allowing 2 devices on one resource for a paging server and night ringer?
It's a good question. 2 devices on one resource is absolutely an option, and it's highlighted. I kind of did that a little in the paging endpoint, and I haven't personally have even an anecdote to look at, frankly, at this point, to know if it would work also with the paging and the night ringer. But I'd be willing to try. I just don't know how I would test it. I think it probably would be able to have two resources like this, or two devices on a resource, as it can, right? I showed in the demonstration that you can have multiple devices on a resource. So absolutely, we can do it. I'm just not certain how it would perform specifically, but I believe the answer is the short answer is yes, we can have two devices on a single resource. How it would perform with regard to paging server and night ringer, that's the question mark, Troy, that I don't have the answer to.
So
But
you would
thank
just
you.
recommend that you just try to test it out, right?
Yeah, just try it. You can
Yeah.
absolutely assign the multiple devices. So if we were looking at the screen
Mhm.
share and we're in a resource, it absolutely has the ability. I'll take this conference room phone. We have a conference phone, of course, assigned to it as a device, but we could potentially add a different device to. If it were a paging endpoint, we have this ability to add multiple paging endpoints, and I think the paging server qualifies for that. That's where the question mark lies, though.
Mhm.
So, Kim, we're going
Mhm.
to have to
Okay.
probably table that one, just with regard to
Okay.
can it put. Well, I don't even know what it would do. I'd have to talk to one of our internal experts on that.
Okay. All right, great. So next question is this is from Herb again. Is there any scanning
Uh,
ability in the system, or do you have to have an analog fax / printer to save as a PDF?
it's kind of a weird two-part question. First and foremost, there's no scanning ability in the system. You'll have to have whatever you're wanting to fax in some sort of electronic format, be it taken as a photo with your smartphone and sent to your email or scanned off of a scanner. Uh, but you'll have to have it in an electronic format to be able to upload it and thus send it. That's the first part of the question. And there's no optics built into the platform. It would just be whatever digital or electronic item you have would be faxable. And then the second question is a little bit not confusing, but maybe I just misreading it poorly. But the analog fax, would you have to have an analog fax printer to save as a PDF? So an analog fax printer would imply, I guess, that you're going to actually make a hard physical print copy of a fax, and thus the PDF being a digital copy wouldn't have any sort of relevance in this scenario. You would absolutely be able to save the fax as a PDF with or without a printer or a fax. But if you needed to print that PDF, then you would, of course, then need to have some printer to actually print the PDF. If I've interpreted the question right, if you need to add clarity to that, Herb, just put it at the end of the Q&A and I'll follow up
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah, just add another question there, Herb, if we didn't quite understand what you're asking there. Okay, next question from Donald. What is the difference between faxing to an email address and simply emailing to an email address?
Very little, if none, unless you want the
Yeah.
fax header. If you want the fax header and all of that to show that it is a fax. So maybe some places actually need a fax and they don't want an attachment via an email. I can't think of a use case, Donald, that besides that, uh, except to say it's nice to have it as an attached fax option. So when you're sending the fax, you have obviously you can send it to their fax machine, but you can also put in their email address, and then that particular recipient might say, "Oh, well, next time just send it to my email," and you could say, "That's what I'd hoped you'd say," because that might be a evolution for them in their faxing practice. But in any case, it is a good
Mm-hmm.
point out that you put there that it is essentially the same.
Great. Okay, good. So this is from Herb again. Does the client allow you to fax rather than having to log into the portal?
Not today. So the desktop application does not have a fax application tab built into it. So those familiar with the desktop app, or if you've seen the desktop app Tech Titan, then you'll know that we have a tab-based tool inside the desktop app that today does not have a fax inbox. But it was an absolute brought up at a product meeting that I happened to have an ear to the door, and I know that they're thinking about it from our development team. So I suspect we'll likely have something in the future, as we've now realized fax still has its teeth
Yeah.
in the industry,
Uh-huh.
even though we keep trying to, as an industry, not have it, as Donald's question
Mm-hmm.
highlighted a minute ago.
Exactly. Okay, so we're at time, but I'm going to just go ahead and go through the rest of these questions. We've got 4 more right now, and I think we can get through them fairly quickly. This is from Anne. Are virtual extensions in voicemail boxes free?
Today, the answer is simply yes in fair use. So I believe there is a fair use number that might be in the hover around. And I'm going to estimate on this because I do not know the answer. Kim, we might be able to try to look this one up too. But if it's more than, let's just say 25, that's when I think you're going to start running into to where it's not good. There might be like a per charge per month per box type of thing. Similar to hunt groups on the system, there's 10 included hunt groups that you can create. After the 10th hunt group, if you need an 11 plus, then you're talking about a per month charge associated with that. There might be some number, it's high, whatever it is, high enough that we don't even put it into our knowledge base. So if there is a boundary, I don't know it because it's not something that we hit our heads on.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
Thanks, Anne. Great question, though. You stumped me there for a minute.
Okay, this one's from Jeremy. Since there's no unlimited dialing plan for a resource line, we often use an unlimited fax resource for an analog conference room phone. Do you see any issue with this?
Except that the ATA itself would be configured as a fax line, and it wouldn't have things like voicemail that are included with the resource, call forwarding that's included with the resource. Things that are a resource that are going to be more not fax related are going to, but that might not be relevant in a fax analog fax conference room. So, kind of dancing around the question a little bit. I think the issue I see with it is that the ATA by default is meant to be a fax adapter. And if I were to look at my devices, I would be able to, for you, Jeremy, I would be able to set up my own device and I could put in an SPA, as I'm showing on the screen here, I could put in an analog telephone adapter and program it myself. The problem is, I think where you're highlighting is that the fax resource has a different sort of price plan associated with it than does a resource, which would be what we would have to assign to this adopted SPA 122 in my example, and we lose that sort of price point. So I see the issue being we'll have less control over that line using the fax adapter as a fax adapter, and there might be some lost feature in that scenario. Those are my two fears. Like there's no extension, for example, to a fax adapter. It's only a phone number, so there's no extension that you could call to call that then conference room phone. So I think that would probably be your biggest hurdle, or at least one of your bigger considerations. Let me say that, because there's no extensions for a fax adapter. It's just a fax line.
Exactly.
Is a fax resource HIPAA compliant? Both
yeah,
are.
Actually, these last two questions are both around HIPAA. So Les and Charles both are asking about is fax resource and WebFax HIPAA compliant?
And the answer is yes. And there's a longer story to it, but HIPAA compliance, as anyone who's dealt with it knows, it's a two-way street. I can make the technology HIPAA compliant, but if it's used in a non-HIPAA compliant manner, it's not HIPAA compliant. And so we'll sign into what's known as a business associates agreement to allow for us to claim that we're doing our end of it legally as a HIPAA compliant provider, where we're storing the faxes in the case of WebFax in an encrypted manner, so they're not sitting unencrypted, which is a HIPAA compliance requirement. And when we're transmitting the faxes, we're using the same technology that fax has. So it's this one-to-one communication and a unique communication between the two fax endpoints to achieve that. So it is HIPAA compliant. And to achieve that compliance, it still requires that business associates agreement to be engaged between the two entities to achieve that, though. But a great question. And we have an article, I believe, online, either in our knowledge base or even potentially on our public website, that is specific to our story with regard to HIPAA compliance. And that's one where you can get a good bit of information. I don't have that teed up, though. I could have considered that next time we do this one, if we do this one again, Kim. Okay. So with that, I guess, thanks for letting me chat for an extra 4 minutes, everybody. And for those who stayed on, that's real generous of you. I'll let Kim wrap up, though. But thanks again. I hope to see you all next webinar.
No, thank you, Erin, very much. That was great, really valuable information. Everybody, please take advantage of signing up for any of our future webinars. They're all equally as good, and have an excellent rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.